This is Optimal Finance Daily, episode 1657, My Triple Bottom Line Path to Financial Independence So Far, by Laura of richandresilientliving.com. And I'm your host and personal finance enthusiast, Diana Merriam. This is the show where I narrate posts from thought leaders in personal finance every single day in 10 minutes or less. If you're someone who wants to keep good personal finance practices top of mind, but you don't have the time to read all the various blogs out there, then this show is for you. And I have a new author for you today. I'll tell you more about Laura right after the reading. So with that, let's dive into our very first post from her and start optimizing your life. My Triple Bottom Line Path to Financial Independence So Far, by Laura of richandresilientliving.com. I was fortunate to grow up with pretty frugal, thrifty, financially responsible influences around me. My parents and grandparents lived well within their means, and other than mortgages for homes they lived in and possibly car notes, didn't tend to carry much debt. I realized that I had grown into someone with a strong aversion to debt when I completed 3 years of service as a Peace Corps volunteer, plus 1 post-college year of study at a university overseas, and could no longer defer the $13,000 in student loan debt that I had accumulated during my days as an undergraduate student. A year later, I was accepted into a high-quality, affordably priced graduate program at the University of Kansas, completing my master's degree in 3 semesters and deferring my student loans again for the duration of my studies. Luckily, the department in which I studied was able to offer me a partial fellowship. My parents also provided some financial support, which allowed me to emerge without accumulating any more debt. It took me about 7 to 8 years to pay my undergraduate student loans off, and other than the mortgage on my first house, I have never carried any other debt. I have paid cash for all of my cars and always paid my credit card bills on time. My first foray into retirement savings didn't occur until I was 30 years old. At that time, I was getting ready to start my paid fellowship with the State Department. My mother encouraged me to establish a Roth IRA and to make regular deposits into this retirement account since as a fellow, I wasn't going to receive any retirement benefits. I knew that people generally save for retirement, and in theory, I understood the concept of compound interest, but I didn't appreciate the power of investing then like I do now. I only managed to direct about $3,000 into this account through the 2.5 years I was abroad. Over the years, after settling back into the US in Washington, D.C., I worked at 2 different nonprofits, both of which offered employer-sponsored retirement plans through TIAA. While I didn't max out my contributions to these plans, I did much better than what I had with my Roth. Having been somewhat environmentally conscious since high school and finding the business practices of many corporations more and more distasteful, I began to direct large portions of the monies in my TIAA accounts, as well as my Roth, into the SRI, that is socially responsible investing options. As I explained in a previous post, I came to find the SRI options available to me somewhat disappointing. However, I felt like moving my money to the SRI options in those plans was the best I could do in that situation, and that's how I stayed for almost 10 years. During that time, I monitored those investments sporadically, but I didn't feel good about them. I became disheartened and disengaged somewhat from optimizing them. I imagine this was one of the biggest financial mistakes I've made along the way. Eventually, I learned about self-directed IRAs. Since I was no longer employed by either of those nonprofits or contributing to a TIAA retirement plan, I was able to open a self-directed IRA and did so just last year. I transferred about 75% of my retirement savings into this self-directed IRA. The other 25% remains in my TIAA accounts while I get my sea legs and figure out how to navigate this world of conscious investing. I intend to write a good bit more in future posts about self-directed IRAs and my experience with them, since my learning curve in using them to invest locally and in line with my values was the main impetus for starting this blog. The largest single contributing factor to my very lean FI net worth, though, isn't my retirement accounts. It was the purchase of a small, affordable home in 2004 in Washington, D.C. This house was located in a quiet neighborhood with very few amenities. At the time I purchased my house, I was the only white resident on my block who wasn't married to a person of color. What this neighborhood did have was solidly built small red brick homes with very good access to a metro stop, lots of trees and greenery, a relatively low crime rate, a strong sense of pride in its working class history, and the highest voter turnout in all of the voting precincts in DC due to the large number of active and engaged seniors that live there. I lived in that house for 9 years and regularly attended civic association meetings, spent time with my neighbors on our various front porches, and sparked lifelong friendships. It was in this house with its small postage stamp size lawn that the seed for my love of gardening, which will be covered in many future blog posts and definitely contributes to my lifestyle, was sown. Because I did not have the traditional 20% deposit saved up to buy a home, I went through the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, NACA. This enabled me to buy my home with a 5% interest rate on my mortgage and only required me to put down a $1,500 deposit. Over the years I owned the home, I made a few improvements, the most expensive one being a bathroom that was installed in the basement. When I was ready to say goodbye to the cold, gray DC winters and the high cost of living in 2013, the secret had gotten out about my quiet, safe, metro accessible neighborhood, and my house sold for almost double what I paid for it. I was able to use the money I earned from the sale of my DC house 2 years later to purchase one outright here in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now I have a roommate who pays rent to live in my home and a number of random side hustles that mostly involve upcycling things others consider waste and selling them online. Also, more about that to come in future posts. I'm still tweaking all of this as I continue settling into life here, begin this foray into blogging, and gather and implement more ideas for how to earn and invest money in ways that adhere to the triple bottom line. So stay tuned. You just listened to the post titled My Triple Bottom Line Path to Financial Independence, so far, by Laura of richandresilientliving.com. And thank you to Laura. She writes about money and lifestyle choices for a regenerative future. Currently, she's focusing on frugality, sustainable living, and the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Come by richandresilientliving.com for a lot more, including resources and coaching. And thanks again to Laura for letting us share her work. What I like about Laura's story is that it provides a great example of how we get better with our money over time. She started with a Roth and contributed what she could, and then when she was making more money and had other tax-advantaged accounts available to her, she contributed more. She also did the best she could with the investments available to her through these accounts, but then upgraded when she learned about self-directed IRAs. As she learned more along the way, she applied her knowledge to how she was managing her money. And that's not to say she didn't make mistakes along the way. We all do. But it didn't stop her from continually learning and taking action to improve her finances. We haven't talked much about self-directed IRAs on this show, and frankly, I'm learning about them myself. From what I can see, the key benefit is the ability to invest outside typical stocks and bonds, so you can invest in real estate, crypto, and businesses that are not publicly traded. There is more of an opportunity here to invest your money in a way that aligns with your values or assets you're really excited about. Keep in mind that you'll need to work with a custodian who specializes in self-directed IRAs versus a regular IRA broker, and they're often criticized for higher fees. However, an investor with a deep knowledge of the non-traditional asset they want to invest in could easily get around the high fee objection with higher investment returns. That being said, keep in mind that self-directed IRA custodian companies can't give financial or investment advice, so the burden of research and due diligence rests entirely with the account holder. While it seems to be more complex to invest with a self-directed IRA, the benefits could be worth it if you're willing to put in the time and energy to properly vet your investments. Well, that should do it for today. Have a happy rest of your day, and I'll see you on the Thursday show tomorrow, where your optimal life awaits.